The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of Station Kepler 7, their piercing wail cutting through the usual hum of life support systems like a blade through silk. Commander Zephyr's mandibles clicked nervously as he watched the tactical display, his compound eyes reflecting the angry red dots that represented the approaching Vorthon fleet. 27 warships, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a small moon, bore down on their position with murderous intent, sir. They'll be in firing range in 14 minutes, reported Lieutenant Crix, her blue-scaled hands dancing across the control console with practiced efficiency. The Aquarian's gills fluttered, with barely contained anxiety as she processed the incoming data streams. Zephyr's forearms moved in the traditional gesture of resignation that his people had used for centuries. The Vorthons had finally found them. After 3 years of running, hiding, and desperately trying to rebuild their shattered civilization, the genocidal empire had tracked down one of the last free settlements in this sector. Station Kepler 7 housed over 50,000 refugees from a dozen different species, all that remained of once proud civilizations that had been systematically exterminated by the Vorthons' relentless expansion. Evacuation protocols are already in motion, Crix continued, her voice steady despite the circumstances. But we can't get everyone to the ships in time. The transport vessels can maybe take half our population before the Vorthons arrive. The commander's mind raced through their limited options. Their defensive systems were woefully inadequate against a fleet of that size. The station's shields might hold for perhaps 10 minutes under concentrated fire. Their own small fleet of patrol ships would be swept aside like insects before a hurricane. It seemed hopeless. That's when she appeared. The conference room's blast doors hissed open, and a figure strode in with the kind of confidence that seemed almost absurd given their desperate situation. She was human, which immediately caught everyone's attention. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and their reputation preceded them like a storm front. They were known for their unpredictability, their refusal to accept defeat, and their disturbing tendency to find solutions where none should exist. She was of average height by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes the color of steel storms. Her clothes were simple, functional, the kind worn by someone who valued utility over appearance. Most remarkably, she seemed completely calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "Commander," she said, her voice carrying an accent that Zephyr couldn't place. "I understand you have a Vorthon problem." Zephyr studied her carefully. He had dealt with humans before, and they never failed to surprise him. "And you are?" "Sarah Chen. I was on a supply run when your emergency broadcast went out." She moved to the tactical display, her fingers tracing the projected paths of the approaching fleet, with the casual interest of someone examining a particularly challenging puzzle. 27 ships, heavy cruisers and destroyers mostly. They're moving in a standard intimidation formation, designed to inspire terror rather than tactical efficiency. Lieutenant Crix's gills fluttered again. "With respect, human terror is an appropriate response. We cannot hope to match their firepower." Sarah's lips curved into what might have been a smile, though there was no humor in it. Firepower isn't everything. Sometimes it's about knowing where to apply pressure. She turned to Zephyr. "I need access to your industrial fabrication systems, your maintenance tunnels, and a detailed schematic of the station's infrastructure. Also, do you have any mining charges left over from the station's construction?" The commander's mandibles clicked in confusion. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we give the Vorthons exactly what they expect," Sarah said, already moving toward the door. "Right up until we don't." Over the next hour, as evacuation ships loaded with families and children lifted off from the station's docking bays, Sarah Chen seemed to be everywhere at once. She moved through the corridors with purposeful energy, speaking quickly to maintenance crews, requisitioning supplies that made no apparent sense together, and accessing computer terminals with an authority that no one questioned. The strange thing was how she seemed to blend into the background when she wasn't actively engaged in some task. Zephyr found himself losing track of her in crowds, his eyes sliding past her as if she were part of the station's infrastructure, rather than a person. It was only when she spoke or moved with obvious intent that she commanded attention. "Curious," he murmured to himself as he watched her disappear around a corner, already focused on her next objective. The Vorthon fleet continued its approach, and with each passing minute, the tension on the station grew thicker. Families said tearful goodbyes as the evacuation continued. Warriors of various species checked and rechecked weapons that they knew would be useless against the coming onslaught. The few defensive turrets the station possessed were powered up and aimed at empty space, their operators knowing they were participating in a gesture of futile defiance. But Sarah Chen moved through it all like she had a secret that no one else was privy to. She worked with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she saw possibilities where others saw only despair. And slowly, impossibly, some of the station's inhabitants began to hope that maybe, just maybe, the approaching fleet had made a terrible mistake in coming here. The human had arrived in the midst of their greatest danger, and now she seemed to be excelling in ways that defied all logic and expectation. The Vorthan flagship Dominion's Wrath cut through space like a predator stalking wounded prey. Admiral Cruex stood on the command bridge, his scaled hide gleaming under the harsh battle lighting, watching the pathetic station grow larger in the main view screen. His lipless mouth curved into what passed for a smile among his species as he contemplated the coming slaughter. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the station," reported his communications officer, a younger Vorthan whose scales still held the bright coloring of inexperience. "Let me guess," Cruex rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "They wish to surrender and beg for mercy?" "No, sir. It's just a standard identification beacon. Station Kepler 7, mixed civilian population requesting safe passage for evacuation vessels." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. In his 15 years of conducting genocide across this sector, he had grown accustomed to the pleading, the desperate bargaining, the futile attempts at negotiation that preceded each extermination. This casual, almost bureaucratic response was unusual. "They're not even trying to negotiate?" he asked. "No, sir. They seem to be conducting a standard evacuation. Our sensors show multiple transport ships have already departed the station." Cruex found this puzzling but ultimately irrelevant. "No matter. They'll all die eventually. Begin the attack." Meanwhile, aboard Station Kepler 7, Sarah Chen was 3 levels deep in the maintenance section, her hands covered in grease as she made final adjustments to a device that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and determination. Around her, a small team of engineers from various species watched with fascination and growing bewilderment. "Human Sarah," said Engineer Vortic, a crystalline being whose entire body chimed when he spoke. "I must confess that I do not understand the purpose of this device. You have connected the station's waste recycling system to the main power grid, bypassed 17 safety protocols, and somehow linked the entire configuration to the navigation beacon array." Sarah wiped her hands on a rag and stood back to admire her work. "It's going to make us temporarily invisible," she said matter-of-factly. The engineer's crystalline structure flickered with confusion. "That is not possible. This station does not possess cloaking technology." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "We don't have cloaking technology, but we do have something better. We have human engineering, alien infrastructure, and a complete disregard for what's supposed to be possible." Before Vortic could ask for clarification, the station shuddered as the first Vorthon energy beam struck the outer shields. Red warning lights bathed the maintenance tunnel in an ominous glow, and the sound of straining machinery echoed through the walls. "It's beginning," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of anticipation rather than fear. "Vortic, I need you to monitor the power fluctuations and keep the recycling systems running at exactly 127% capacity. If they dip below that or exceed 130%, the whole thing will either fail or explode." "Both options sound extremely undesirable," the engineer chimed nervously. "True, but only one of them will get us killed by Vorthons," Sarah replied, already moving toward the access ladder. "I'll be in section C7. When I give the signal, activate the array." She climbed quickly through the maintenance shafts, navigating the maze of pipes and conduits with the confidence of someone who had spent the last hour memorizing every detail of the station's blueprint. The constant shuddering of the station under Vorthan fire provided an ominous percussion to her movements. Sarah emerged in a section near the outer hull, where a small team of the station's defenders had gathered around what remained of their sensor array. Lieutenant Crix was there, her blue scales now pale with stress as she watched their shield steadily weaken under the relentless bombardment. "How long until shield failure?" Sarah asked without preamble. "Perhaps 6 more minutes," Crix replied. "The Vorthans are taking their time, probably savoring the moment. They like to let their victims contemplate their approaching doom." "Perfect," Sarah said, settling down at a secondary control station. "That gives us just enough time." She began typing rapidly, her fingers dancing across the alien interface with surprising fluency. Code scrolled across her screen in languages that most humans had never seen, yet she navigated through it like she was reading her native tongue. "What are you doing?" Crix asked, leaning over to watch. "I'm teaching your station to lie," Sarah replied. "Every sensor array, every piece of scanning equipment, every detection system the Vorthons have is about to start telling them exactly what I want them to hear, instead of what's actually happening." The station rocked again, more violently this time. Through the transparent aluminum viewing port, they could see the Vorthon fleet in all its terrible glory, their ship's weapons lighting up space like a deadly fireworks display. Each blast that struck the station's shield sent cascades of energy across the protective barrier, creating beautiful but terrifying patterns of destruction. "Signal ready," came Vortic's voice over the communication system. "All systems are operating within parameters, though I feel obligated to mention that these parameters were never intended to exist." Sarah's hands paused over her controls. "Here we go," she muttered, then pressed a sequence of keys that shouldn't have done anything significant. Aboard the Dominion's Wrath, Admiral Cruex was beginning to grow impatient with the bombardment when something extraordinary happened. His sensor operator suddenly straightened in his chair, staring at his displays with obvious confusion. "Sir, I'm getting strange readings from the station." "Define strange," Cruex growled. "The station appears to be phasing in and out of normal space. Our targeting computers can't get a lock. It's like the entire structure is flickering between dimensions." The Admiral moved to examine the displays himself. Indeed, the station seemed to be wavering like a mirage, its outline becoming indistinct and then snapping back into focus, only to blur again moments later. "Some kind of experimental defense system," he concluded. "Double our fire rate, overwhelm whatever technology they're using." But as the Vorthon fleet increased its assault, the station's peculiar behavior only intensified. It began to appear in multiple locations simultaneously, as if there were dozens of identical stations scattered throughout the local space. The Vorthon targeting systems, designed to lock onto solid, predictable targets, began to malfunction as they tried to process contradictory information. The chaos aboard the Vorthon flagship was unlike anything Admiral Cruex had experienced in his long military career. His bridge crew frantically worked their controls, trying to make sense of sensor readings that defied all logic and physics. The station that should have been a simple target was now appearing in 17 different locations simultaneously, each one reading as completely solid and real to their instruments. "Sir, our weapons are firing at empty space," reported the tactical officer, his voice strained with frustration. "Every time we achieve target lock, the station shifts to a different position. But it's not moving, sir. It's just somewhere else." Cruex's claws scraped against the metal railing of his command platform. "That's impossible. Space stations don't just relocate themselves. They're fixed installations." "Yes, sir, but according to our sensors, this one seems to disagree with that basic principle." What the Vorthons couldn't know was that deep within Station Kepler 7, Sarah Chen was orchestrating the most complex technological deception ever attempted. She had turned the station's waste recycling system into a massive signal amplifier, using the quantum fluctuations generated by matter dissolution to create false sensor signatures. The navigation beacon array, normally used for helping ships find the station, was now broadcasting a symphony of fake positional data that made it appear as if the station existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously. "Vortic, how are the power levels?" She called out through the communication system while her hands flew across multiple control interfaces. "Holding steady at 128.7%, came the crystalline engineer's chimed response. "Though I should mention that several components are now glowing colors that I don't believe exist in normal space." "That's fine," Sarah replied absently, focused on adjusting the quantum resonance frequencies. "As long as they're not glowing the color of impending explosion, we're good." Lieutenant Crix watched the tactical display with growing amazement. The Vorthon fleet, which moments ago had been systematically destroying their shields, was now firing randomly into empty space. Their energy beams lanced through areas where their sensors insisted the station should be, but found nothing but vacuum. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "Human engineering," said Commander Zephyr, who had arrived to witness what he was already thinking of as either a miracle or the most elaborate suicide attempt in galactic history. They have a saying, "If it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid." Sarah laughed without taking her eyes off her screens. Actually, this is still pretty stupid. But it's working, so we'll call it creatively stupid, and move on. The station continued to flicker through multiple apparent positions, each shift coordinated with the natural fluctuations in the Vorthan targeting systems. Sarah had studied their technology during her travels, learning that their sensors relied heavily on quantum entanglement principles for accuracy. By feeding false quantum signatures into space, she was essentially teaching their instruments to lie to them, but the deception couldn't last forever. The Vorthans were beginning to adapt. "Sir," the Vorthan sensor operator reported, "I'm detecting patterns in the anomalous readings. If I filter out the quantum static and focus on gravitational signatures..." Admiral Cruex turned to his science officer, a scarred veteran whose expertise had served the fleet well in previous campaigns. "Can we cut through their deception?" "Given time, yes. Their system appears to be generating false quantum signatures, but they can't fake gravity wells or mass displacement. If we switch to gravimetric scanning and ignore all other sensor input, we should be able to locate the real station within approximately 8 minutes. "Do it," Cruex ordered. Then to his communications officer, "Open a channel to the station. I want to speak with whoever is responsible for this creativity." The communication request reached Station Kepler 7 just as Sarah was making her final adjustments to the deception array. She paused in her work, considering the request. "Put him through," she told Lieutenant Crix. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath. Admiral Cruex stood in the center, his reptilian features twisted with a mixture of anger and what might have been grudging respect. "I am Admiral Cruex of the Vorthan Imperial Fleet," he announced. "To whoever is responsible for this technological trickery, I offer my compliments. In 15 years of conquest, I have never encountered such an innovative defense." Sarah stepped into view of the camera, her expression calm and professional. "Sarah Chen, currently consulting for Station Kepler 7's survival." "Thank you for the compliment, Admiral. I'm sure you understand that I can't exactly explain how we're doing this." Cruex studied the human with predatory interest. "You are the architect of this deception?" "I prefer to think of myself as a translator," Sarah replied. "I'm translating your sensor's expectations into something more fictional." "Impressive," the Admiral admitted. "However, you should know that we are already adapting to your methods. Within minutes, we will cut through your illusions and resume our bombardment. This display has been entertaining, but it has only delayed the inevitable." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're probably right. Your gravitometric sensors should be able to penetrate the quantum static we're generating. That's good tactical thinking." Something in her tone made Commander Zephyr's mandibles click nervously. There was a note of satisfaction in the human's voice that suggested this conversation was going exactly as she had planned. "However," Sarah continued, "there's something you should probably know about gravitometric scanning in this particular region of space." Admiral Cruex's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Well, you see, Station Kepler 7 was built in orbit around a quantum unstable planetoid. That's why it was such a perfect hiding spot for refugees. The local gravitational fields are extremely unpredictable due to quantum fluctuations in the planet's core. Your gravitometric sensors will certainly detect mass signatures, but..." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "But they won't be able to tell you which mass signatures are real and which are gravitational echoes bouncing off quantum probability fields," Cruex finished, understanding dawning in his voice. "Exactly," Sarah said with a smile that was somehow both apologetic and deeply satisfied. "So your enhanced scanning will actually make the situation worse, not better. You'll be detecting dozens of gravitational signatures, all of them apparently solid and real, scattered across a 3-dimensional area roughly the size of a small moon." The Vorthan Admiral stared at her for a long moment, and then, incredibly, he began to laugh. It was a harsh, rasping sound, but unmistakably laughter nonetheless. "Magnificent," he said. "You have turned our own superior technology against us. But surely you realize that this is still only a delay. We have time, human. We can methodically investigate every signature until we find the real station." Sarah's smile widened. "That's true. But Admiral, you might want to ask yourself why I'm so calm about that possibility." Admiral Cruex studied the human's face on his view screen, searching for any hint of deception or false bravado. What he saw disturbed him more than any weapon or threat could have. Sarah Chen looked like someone holding a winning hand in a game where her opponent didn't even know what cards were being played. "What aren't you telling me, human?" he asked. "Several things, actually," Sarah replied cheerfully. "But the most relevant one is probably this. While you've been focused on finding our station, you haven't been paying attention to what your own ships are doing." Cruex's blood went cold. He spun toward his sensor operator. "Full tactical scan of our fleet now." The young Vorthon's scales flickered through several color changes as he processed the incoming data. "Sir, our ships have been maneuvering to investigate the false gravitational signatures. They've spread out across a spherical area approximately 2 million kilometers in diameter. Current formation is..." "Sir, we have no formation. Each ship is operating independently, trying to investigate different potential targets." "And?" Cruex demanded, though he was beginning to suspect where this was leading. "Sir, our fleet is completely scattered. No mutual fire support, no coordinated defense patterns. If an enemy force were to attack now..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Cruex understood military tactics well enough to know that his fleet was now vulnerable to exactly the kind of attack that had made him so successful in his previous campaigns. He had allowed an unknown enemy to manipulate him into adopting the worst possible tactical position. "How long to reform the fleet?" he asked tersely. "At least 20 minutes, sir. Some of our ships are nearly a light minute away from the main group." Back on station Kepler 7, Sarah was making final adjustments to a device that looked nothing like standard military equipment. In fact, it resembled a collection of children's toys connected by fiber optic cables to what appeared to be a coffee machine. "Sarah," Commander Zephyr said carefully, "what exactly is that device?" "This," she said, patting the bizarre contraption affectionately, "is every toy, game, and puzzle that the refugee children brought with them when they fled their homeworlds. I've connected them to create the most sophisticated random number generation system ever conceived." Lieutenant Crix's gills fluttered in confusion. "Random numbers? Why do we need random numbers?" "Because," Sarah explained while connecting the final cable, "the Vorthons are about to discover that their scattered formation makes them perfect targets for the oldest human military tactic in the book." She moved to a communication console and began broadcasting on a frequency that most of the galaxy had learned to monitor. It was the emergency channel used by merchant vessels, traders, and anyone else who needed to communicate across interstellar distances without military encryption. "This is Sarah Chen aboard station Kepler 7, she announced. "To any ships in the vicinity, we have a situation that might interest you. 27 Vorthon warships are currently scattered across local space in isolated positions with no mutual support. They're busy investigating false sensor readings and probably won't notice additional ships in the area for at least 15 minutes. She paused, letting that information sink in across whatever ships might be listening. "I'm now transmitting precise coordinate data for each Vorthon vessel, along with their current heading and speed. This information is being updated in real time, thanks to their own gravitometric scanning attempts, which are painting a perfect picture of their locations." Commander Zephyr's compound eyes widened as he understood what she was doing. "You're calling in every pirate, mercenary, and resistance fighter in the sector." "Not just the sector," Sarah corrected. "This frequency reaches 3 sectors in every direction. And the Vorthons have made a lot of enemies over the years." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Communication channels that had been silent for months suddenly erupted with chatter as ships across local space began plotting intercept courses. Pirates who normally wouldn't work together were coordinating attacks. Merchant vessels with hidden weapons were powering up systems they'd hoped never to use. Even some military units from species the Vorthons hadn't yet exterminated were breaking cover to join what was rapidly becoming the largest coordinated strike against the Empire in decades. Admiral Cruex watched his tactical display with growing horror as dozens, then hundreds of ships began appearing at the edges of sensor range. Each one was heading directly toward one of his scattered vessels, and his fleet was too spread out to provide mutual support. "Sir, incoming transmission on the emergency frequency," his communications officer reported. "From the human?" "No, sir, from Captain Morax of the Zephyrian Resistance. He says, and I quote, 'Thank you for the gift, Admiral. We've been waiting 3 years for an opportunity like this.'" More transmissions followed. Pirate captains expressing gratitude for the tactical intelligence. Merchant captains who had lost family to Vorthon raids announcing their intention to collect some long-overdue payment. Even some species Cruex had thought completely exterminated were checking in to express their appreciation for the opportunity. "Sir," his tactical officer said urgently, "we're receiving targeting locks from over 200 vessels. They're approaching from all vectors, using microjumps to avoid our long-range sensors until they're practically on top of our scattered ships." Cruex realized that in less than 10 minutes, his fleet was going to be engaged in 200 separate battles across an area too large for any kind of coordinated response. It was exactly the kind of tactical nightmare that had allowed him to destroy so many other fleets over the years. "All ships, emergency recall to the flagship," he ordered. "Maximum burn, abandon current investigations." But Sarah had anticipated this as well. As soon as the Vorthon ships began moving to regroup, she activated the final component of her strategy. The random number generator, built from refugee children's toys, began feeding data to the quantum deception array. Instead of creating false signatures in predictable patterns, the system now generated completely random quantum static. The Vorthon ships, trying to navigate back to a rally point, found their sensors showing them dozens of possible routes through space that all looked equally valid but led in completely different directions. "Navigation is compromised," reported the Dominion's Wrath's helmsman. "Our instruments are showing multiple conflicting course plots. I can't determine which readings are accurate." Admiral Cruex stood in the center of his bridge, watching his carefully planned extermination mission dissolve into chaos. His fleet was scattered under attack from all sides, and unable to navigate reliably due to sensor interference that somehow involved children's toys. "Human," he said into the communication channel, "I confess that I underestimated your species' capacity for creative destruction." Sarah's voice came back cheerful and professional. "Oh, this isn't destruction, Admiral. This is just Tuesday. You should see what we do when we're actually trying." The first explosions lit up space as pirate ships engaged the scattered Vorthon vessels. Each engagement was a small-scale battle, but with over 200 attackers coordinating their efforts through the intelligence Sarah was providing, the Vorthons found themselves fighting on unfavorable terms for the first time in years. "Sir," the communications officer said quietly, "the human is hailing us again." "Put her through." Sarah appeared on the screen, still standing calmly in the station's command center, as if orchestrating the destruction of an entire fleet was just another day at the office. "Admiral, I have a proposition for you," she said. Admiral Cruex stared at the human on his view screen, while explosions continued to light up the space around his scattered fleet. Each flash represented one of his ships under attack, and his tactical display showed the grim reality of their situation. They were losing. "What kind of proposition?"
he asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the chaos surrounding him. Sarah's expression remained calm, almost conversational.
"The kind where you get to live through the next hour," she replied. "Your fleet is finished, Admiral. Even if you could regroup, which you can't thanks to the sensor interference, you're outnumbered 4-1 by ships that are highly motivated to see you dead. Your only real choice now is how you want this to end. And you're offering me what exactly? Safe passage?" Cruex's tone carried the skepticism of someone who had never given quarter and didn't expect to receive it. "I'm offering you something much more valuable than safe passage," Sarah said. "I'm offering you the chance to actually accomplish something worthwhile for the first time in your career." The Admiral's reptilian features twisted into a snarl. "I have conquered 17 star systems for the glory of the Vorthon Empire." "You've murdered billions of innocent people," Sarah corrected matter-of-factly. "That's not conquest, Admiral. That's just waste on an industrial scale. But you could change that starting right now." Before Cruex could respond, his tactical officer interrupted. "Sir, we're losing the decimator. Pirates have broken through her shields. The Annihilator reports critical damage to her main drive. And, sir," the retribution just exploded. Sarah waited patiently while the Admiral processed the loss of 3 more ships. "Admiral, you have perhaps 8 minutes before your flagship becomes the primary target of every ship in this system. I can help you, but you need to decide quickly." "What do you want?" Cruex asked through gritted teeth. "I want you to do something unprecedented in Vorthon military history," Sarah said. "I want you to surrender." The bridge of the Dominion's Wrath fell completely silent except for the constant alerts from damaged systems and ships under attack. The concept of surrender was so alien to Vorthon military culture that several of Cruex's officers simply stared at their controls as if they had forgotten how to operate them. "Impossible," Cruex finally said. "The Empire does not surrender. We fight until victory or death." "Yes, I've noticed that," Sarah replied. "It's one of your species' less charming qualities. But here's the thing, Admiral. You're going to die today either way. The question is whether you die as just another failed conqueror or as the first Vorthon in history to choose survival over pointless destruction." She gestured to something off-screen, and suddenly the tactical display showed not just the current battle, but a projection of its likely outcome. The computer models were clear. Within 15 minutes, the entire Vorthon fleet would be destroyed. "But if you surrender," Sarah continued, "I can guarantee safe passage for you and your surviving crews to the nearest neutral system. More importantly, I can arrange for you to carry a message back to your empire." "What message?" Cruex asked, though he was beginning to understand that this human had been thinking several steps ahead of him from the very beginning. "The message that the galaxy has changed," Sarah said. "That the scattered, terrorized prey you've been hunting for years have learned to work together. That someone has figured out how to coordinate resistance on a scale your empire isn't prepared to handle, and that maybe, just maybe, it's time for the Vorthon Empire to consider a different approach to interstellar relations." The Admiral looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all veterans, hardened by years of conquest, but he could see the same realization in their eyes that was growing in his own mind. They had walked into a trap so sophisticated that they were only now beginning to understand its full scope. "You planned all of this," he said. "The sensor deception, the scattered formation, even the timing of the resistance response. This wasn't a desperate defense. This was a coordinated military operation." Sarah's smile was neither cruel nor triumphant, just satisfied. "The refugees on this station include some very talented people, Admiral. Engineers, tacticians, communication specialists, data analysts. When you scatter populations from 17 different star systems and force them to work together for survival, they tend to develop some interesting capabilities." Another explosion lit up space, closer this time. The Vorthon ship destroyer had just been overwhelmed by a coordinated attack from 6 different vessels. "5 minutes, Admiral," Sarah said gently. "After that, I won't be able to guarantee anything." Cruex closed his eyes and made a decision that would have been unthinkable for any Vorthon commander in the Empire's long history of expansion. He opened a fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Cruex. Cease fire and prepare for unconditional surrender." The response was immediate and chaotic. Half his remaining ship commanders demanded clarification, thinking they had misheard. The other half simply refused to acknowledge the order. His own bridge crew stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "Sir," his tactical officer said carefully, "did you just order us to surrender?" "I ordered us to survive," Cruex replied. "There's a difference, though. It's taken me 15 years to learn it." Sarah's voice came through the communication channel, now broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention all vessels in the Kepler-7 system. The Vorthon fleet is standing down. Repeat, the Vorthon fleet is surrendering. All attack runs are to cease immediately. Any ship that continues to engage Vorthon vessels after this announcement will be considered to be acting outside the coordinated resistance effort." The effect was remarkable. Within minutes, the space around Station Kepler-7 transformed from a battlefield into something resembling a very tense diplomatic gathering. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species maintained weapons locks on the remaining Vorthon vessels, but the shooting had stopped. "Now what?" Cruex asked. "Now we demonstrate something that your empire has probably forgotten exists," Sarah said. "We show you what it looks like when different species work together, instead of trying to exterminate each other." Over the next hour, Admiral Cruex watched the most extraordinary display of interspecies cooperation he had ever witnessed. The same ships that had been trying to destroy his fleet began coordinating rescue operations for Vorthon survivors. Medical vessels moved between the damaged ships, offering aid regardless of which side they had been fighting for. Engineering teams worked together to stabilize critically damaged vessels, sharing resources and expertise with the efficiency of a military organization, but the compassion of a relief effort. "This is impossible," muttered his science officer. "These species have been enemies for generations. The Aquarians and the Zephyrians fought a war just 50 years ago. The crystal beings don't even breathe the same atmosphere as most organic species. But Cruex was beginning to understand something that his empire had never grasped. Fear and desperation had a way of breaking down barriers that politics and prejudice had maintained for centuries. When survival was at stake, the differences between species became less important than their shared desire to live. "Human," he said into the communication channel. "I need to understand something. How did you coordinate all of this? How did you get so many different species to work together?" Sarah appeared on his screen again, and for the first time since their conversation began, she looked tired. "Admiral, when you spend 3 years as a refugee moving from system to system, always one step ahead of your empire's expansion, you meet a lot of other people in the same situation. You learn that everyone has skills, everyone has something to contribute, and everyone wants the same basic thing: to survive and protect the people they care about." She gestured toward something off-screen. "The coordination network you're seeing didn't happen overnight. It's been building for years. One contact at a time, one favor at a time, one shared moment of desperation at a time. Your empire created this alliance by giving all these different species a common enemy. But the logistics alone," Cruex began, "are handled by the survivors of 17 different civilizations pooling their knowledge and resources," Sarah finished. "You destroyed their worlds, Admiral, but you didn't destroy their expertise. We have Zephyrian tacticians, Aquarian engineers, crystalline mathematicians, and human problem solvers all working together because they have to." The Admiral watched as a makeshift hospital ship docked with one of his damaged vessels to evacuate wounded Vorthon crew members. The medical team boarding his ship included species that his empire had been systematically exterminating for over a decade. "Why are they helping us?" he asked quietly. "Because that's what people do when they're not busy being afraid of each other," Sarah replied. "Your empire has spent so much time spreading fear that you've forgotten what happens when people feel safe enough to be decent to each other." 2 weeks later, Admiral Cruex found himself in a situation he had never imagined possible. He was sitting in the conference room of Station Kepler 7, not as a conqueror or prisoner, but as something unprecedented in Vorthon history: a diplomat. The transformation of the station during those 2 weeks had been remarkable to witness. What had begun as a desperate refugee settlement had evolved into something that looked very much like the headquarters of an interstellar alliance. Ships from dozens of species came and went regularly, bringing supplies, information, and new refugees fleeing from various conflicts across the galaxy. Sarah Chen had seemingly vanished into the background once the immediate crisis was over. Cruex found this puzzling at first, until he began to understand that this was simply how she operated. When action was needed, she was everywhere at once, coordinating, planning, solving problems that others couldn't even see. But once things settled into routine operations, she became almost invisible, just another technician maintaining the complex systems that kept the station running. He had tried to find her several times over the past few days, wanting to understand how someone could orchestrate such a complex operation, and then simply fade into the background as if it were nothing remarkable. When he finally located her, she was 3 levels down in the engineering section, teaching a group of young refugees how to maintain the quantum resonance array that had made their deception possible. "The key is understanding that technology isn't just about the machines," she was explaining. To her small audience of mixed-species students, it's about understanding what the machines are supposed to do, and then figuring out creative ways to make them do things they were never designed for. A young Aquarian raised her hand. "But isn't that dangerous? What if the machines break?" Sarah smiled. "Machines break anyway, especially when people are shooting at them. The question is whether they break in useful ways or just break." Admiral Cruex cleared his throat, and Sarah looked up with the expression of someone who had been expecting his visit. "Admiral," she said, greeting him with the same calm professionalism she had shown during their first meeting. "How are the diplomatic preparations going?" "Slowly," he admitted. "My empire doesn't have much experience with negotiation. We're more accustomed to making demands and enforcing them." "Yes, I've noticed that," Sarah replied. "But you're learning, which is more than most people expected. Your crew seems to be adapting as well." This was true, though Cruex still found it difficult to believe. His officers, trained from birth to view other species as either subjects or enemies, were now working alongside the same aliens they had been trying to exterminate just weeks earlier. The cultural shock should have been overwhelming. but somehow the practical necessities of survival and cooperation had made the transition almost natural. "I need to understand something," Cruex said. "The message you want me to carry back to the Empire. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" Sarah set down the tool she had been using and gave him her full attention. "I'm hoping to give your Empire the same choice I gave you, Admiral. They can continue their current path and face an increasingly organized and capable resistance, or they can consider the possibility that there might be better ways to interact with the galaxy. And if they choose to continue the extermination campaigns, then they'll discover that the resistance network is much larger and more sophisticated than they realize," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "What happened to your fleet wasn't a lucky break, Admiral. It was a demonstration. We wanted your Empire to understand that the rules of engagement have changed." Cruex considered this. Over the past 2 weeks, he had been given access to intelligence reports that painted a very different picture of the galactic situation than what his Empire's propaganda had suggested. The Resistance wasn't a collection of scattered survivors hiding in remote systems. It was a growing alliance with impressive technological capabilities, extensive communication networks, and a level of strategic coordination that rivaled anything the Vorthan military had achieved. "The children's toys," he said suddenly. "The random number generator you used to disrupt our sensors. That wasn't just battlefield improvisation, was it?" Sarah's smile was enigmatic. "What do you think?" "I think you were testing a new type of electronic warfare system using equipment that would never be suspected or detected by military intelligence," Cruex said slowly. "I think you've been developing countermeasures to our technology for years, and you used our attack as an opportunity to field test them. That's a very sophisticated analysis, Admiral. Your Empire might benefit from that kind of thinking. You're not going to confirm or deny it? I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions and report them back to your superiors," Sarah said. "They can decide for themselves what those conclusions might mean for their future strategic planning." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Zephyr, whose mandibles were clicking with what Cruex had learned to recognize as excitement. "Sarah, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Outer Rim territories. 3 more Vorthan fleets have surrendered after encountering coordinated resistance. They're requesting the same diplomatic protocols we established here." Sarah nodded as if this was exactly what she had been expecting. "How many ships total?" 47 vessels across the 3 fleets. The resistance cells in those systems used modifications of your sensor disruption technique, combined with coordinated strikes by local defense forces. Admiral Cruex felt something cold settle in his stomach. 3 more fleets? In 2 weeks? "The technique scales well," Sarah explained. "Once you understand the basic principles, it can be adapted to different tactical situations. And word travels fast when something works. You're talking about coordinated military action across multiple star systems," Cruex said, his voice strained. "That level of organization requires exactly what we've been building for the past 3 years, Sarah finished. "Admiral, your Empire has been fighting individual battles against isolated populations. But those populations haven't been isolated. They've been networking, sharing information, developing collective capabilities. What you encountered here wasn't a lucky defense. It was the Resistance going public. The implications hit Cruex like a physical blow. His Empire had been operating under the assumption that they were fighting a series of separate, unconnected conflicts. The reality was that they had been facing a single coordinated opponent that had been deliberately remaining hidden until they were ready to reveal themselves." "How many systems?" he asked quietly. "Are part of the Resistance network?" Sarah considered the question. "That's classified information, Admiral. But I will say this. Your Empire has been very effective at creating refugees, and refugees are highly motivated to work together." Commander Zephyr's mandibles clicked again. "Sarah, there's something else. The diplomatic convoy from the Terran Federation has arrived. They're requesting permission to dock," Cruex started. "The Terran Federation? But humans are a minor species. Your government barely has influence beyond your home system." Sarah's expression became very carefully neutral. "Admiral, there are a lot of things about humans that your Empire's intelligence services have gotten wrong. Our government's official influence is indeed limited. But humans have a tendency to travel, to trade, to settle in places where they probably shouldn't, and to make friends with people they probably shouldn't. We've been doing that for generations. The cold feeling in Cruex's stomach intensified as he began to understand the true scope of what he was dealing with. How many humans are involved in this resistance network? Officially? None. The Terran Federation maintains strict neutrality in interstellar conflicts. And unofficially, Sarah's smile was answer enough. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler-7, as historians were already calling it, Admiral Cruex stood in the council chambers of the Vorthon Imperial Palace, delivering what would become known as the most important military briefing in his species' history. The room was filled with the Empire's highest-ranking officials, their scaled faces reflecting the harsh lighting as they listened to words that challenged everything they thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. "The Resistance is not what we believed it to be," Cruex said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. "It is not a collection of scattered survivors hiding in remote systems. It is a sophisticated alliance with technological capabilities that match or exceed our own, communication networks that span multiple sectors, and strategic coordination that has consistently outmaneuvered our best tacticians." Supreme Commander Vex, whose authority was second only to the Emperor himself, leaned forward in his ceremonial chair. "You are suggesting that a handful of refugee populations have somehow developed capabilities that rival our military? I am suggesting that we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of our opposition," Cruex replied. "What we interpreted as successful conquest was actually the strategic withdrawal of organized populations who were buying time to prepare for coordinated resistance." He activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber, showing a 3-dimensional map of known space. Red dots marked Vorthon-controlled systems, while blue dots indicated confirmed resistance activity. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. The resistance wasn't scattered randomly across the galaxy. It formed a coherent network that surrounded and, in some cases, penetrated Vorthon territory. In the 6 months since Kepler-7, 17 more Vorthon fleets have encountered coordinated resistance. 12 of those fleets have been destroyed or forced to surrender. The others have withdrawn after suffering significant casualties. The chamber erupted in angry chittering and scale rattling as the assembled officials reacted to this information. Supreme Commander Vex raised a clawed hand for silence. "And you attribute this to the human Sarah Chen?" "I attribute this to the network that Sarah Chen helped to reveal," Cruex corrected. "The human was a catalyst, not the cause. The resistance existed before she appeared at Kepler-7. What she did was demonstrate that it was ready to act openly." "Where is she now?" asked Intelligence Director Korth, her voice carrying the cold efficiency that had made her legendary throughout the Empire. "Unknown," Cruex admitted. "After the diplomatic protocols were established at Kepler-7, she disappeared. Our intelligence suggests that she may be operating in the Outer Rim territories, but we have no confirmed sightings." This was not entirely true. Cruex had received unconfirmed reports of human involvement in resistance activities across multiple systems, but the descriptions were always vague, contradictory. Sometimes the human was described as a tactical advisor, working with local defense forces, other times as an engineer helping to adapt alien technology, occasionally as a diplomat facilitating negotiations between different species. What struck him as most significant was how these reports described the human's behavior. In every case, she seemed to appear when crisis demanded action, solve whatever immediate problem needed solving, and then fade into the background once things stabilized. It was as if she had a talent for being exactly where she was needed when she was needed, and completely invisible when she wasn't. "What do you recommend?" Supreme Commander Vex asked. Cruex had spent months preparing for this question, knowing that his answer would likely determine the future course of the Empire's expansion. "I recommend that we open formal diplomatic channels with the Resistance Alliance." The chamber fell completely silent. The concept of the Vorthon Empire engaging in diplomacy with its enemies was so unprecedented that several officials seemed unsure they had heard correctly. "Diplomacy?" Intelligence Director Korth's voice carried a note of incredulity that would have been considered insubordinate if directed at anyone other than a war hero. "We are the Vorthon Empire. We do not negotiate with prey species." "With respect, Director," Cruex replied, "they are no longer prey species. They are a coordinated military alliance with demonstrated capability to inflict significant casualties on our forces." Continued military action will result in a prolonged conflict that we may not be able to win. Impossible, snarled General Drex, commander of the Empire's largest battle fleet. No collection of inferior species can match Forthan military might. General, Cruex said patiently, I held the same belief 6 months ago. I was commanding 27 ships when I encountered the resistance at Kepler 7. When the engagement ended, I had 7 ships remaining, and those only because the resistance chose to accept our surrender, rather than complete our destruction. He activated another section of the holographic display, showing tactical analyses of recent engagements. The resistance has consistently demonstrated superior intelligence gathering, more flexible tactical adaptation, and better coordination between diverse forces than our own military. They are not winning through superior firepower, they are winning through superior strategy. Supreme Commander Vex studied the display for a long moment. And you believe diplomacy will achieve what military force has not? I believe diplomacy will allow us to survive as an empire, Cruex said bluntly. The alternative is a prolonged war against an opponent that has proven capable of adapting to our tactics faster than we can develop new ones. The debate that followed lasted for hours, with officials arguing positions that ranged from immediate military escalation to complete withdrawal from contested territories. But Cruex could see that the logic of his position was gradually becoming apparent, even to the most militant members of the Council. The Empire's expansion had stalled. Their casualty rates were increasing with each engagement. Intelligence reports confirmed that the resistance was growing stronger and more coordinated rather than weaker. Most importantly, the economic costs of maintaining a war footing across multiple sectors was beginning to strain even the Empire's considerable resources. Very well, Supreme Commander Vex finally announced. We will authorize preliminary diplomatic contact with this resistance alliance. Admiral Cruex, you will serve as our primary negotiator. Sir, Cruex replied, I should mention that the resistance has already specified their preferred diplomatic protocols. All negotiations must take place at neutral locations, with representatives from multiple species present to ensure transparency. And sir, they have specifically requested that any human representatives be given full diplomatic immunity. Why humans specifically? Intelligence Director Korth asked. Because, Cruex said, remembering Sarah Chen's calm confidence in the face of overwhelming odds. They seem to have a talent for finding solutions that nobody else would think to look for. 3 months later, the first formal peace treaty between the Vorthon Empire and the Galactic Resistance Alliance was signed aboard Station Unity, a massive diplomatic facility that had been constructed specifically for the negotiations. The treaty established formal borders, trade agreements, and protocols for resolving future disputes without military action. Admiral Cruex attended the signing ceremony in his new role as the Empire's ambassador to the Alliance. As he watched representatives from dozens of species formally ending a conflict that had lasted over a decade, he found himself scanning the crowd for a familiar face. He didn't see Sarah Chen among the diplomats, engineers, or military officers who filled the station's main assembly hall. But just as the ceremony concluded and the delegates began to disperse, he caught a glimpse of someone in maintenance coveralls disappearing through a service hatch in the far wall. For just a moment, he could have sworn it was her. Later, when he asked Station Unity's administrator about the maintenance staff, he was told that the environmental systems had been running perfectly for weeks and that no maintenance work had been scheduled for that section of the station. Admiral Cruex smiled to himself as he realized that some things would probably never change. In the midst of danger, she excelled. In quiet moments, she vanished, and somehow that seemed exactly as it should be.